Okay, hello and welcome to this next episode of Almost Got It, where we cover the latest breaking news around consciousness, transhumanism, AI, tech, and we attempt to answer the question, what in the hell does all this mean? We're excited today to welcome Sean Dadashi as our first guest. He's founder of Rosebud, former CTO and founder of Somatic Studios, has a cognitive science degree from UC Berkeley, and I'm happy to report that I am a happy user of his app, Rosebud. We'll also be covering the topic of the launch of the Therabody and HelpBench. And disclaimers for today, as usual, you're joined by Dylan Dane, who's CEO of System 2, an engineer, entrepreneur, ex-MIT and Google and Y Combinator and Burner, from Sri Lanka, husband and cat father.
And also Ben, of course, who is a father, CEO, coach, a computer science scientist, also had an exit to Google, and the former CEO and board member of the Esalen Institute. And please subscribe to Almost Got It on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, etc., and give us feedback. And let's get started. Very excited for our first guest interview with Sean.
Excited to be here.
Why don't we start with just a little bit of how's it going?
Good. It's a super busy season right now. My co-founder, Chris, who just had his second child. So that's exciting. And also, we're going through shifts on the team. We're expanding a little bit. And so a lot of things happening at the same time, which, is exciting, but also, asks, sort of like asking me to show up with more presence than I've needed to in the past to be able to handle all of this complexity that's happening right now.
Yeah, as if one job wasn't enough, right? Now you basically have to do a second one while Chris is out. And Dylan, how about you?
I am a little sick today, but super thrilled to be here for our first guest interview. And I've heard a lot about Sean, but haven't hung out much with him, and so very excited for this.
Awesome. Well, so let's dive in, and Sean, I would love to hear a little background about you. We've known each other as friends for quite a while, and I know that your background is in cognitive science, and you've been building tech for a long time. And maybe you want to tell us a little bit about Rosebud and this app that you founded.
For those that don't know, Rosebud is a therapist-backed AI journal and habit tracker that gets to know you and helps you reach your goals. So, our goal with this is to provide people with sort of a personal mentor that knows everything about you, knows how you want to grow, and is proactive in helping you get there.
And just as a disclaimer, a couple of things. One, I started using Rosebud back in December, and now I've actually been using it basically every day. So yeah, tell us a little bit about how you were inspired to create Rosebud.
And actually, going even before that, Sean, you've been working in mental health space for quite a bit, and your previous startup was in a similar space, and you studied cognitive science at Berkeley. What got this whole thing started? Like, what was little, I don't know, 5-year-old Sean thinking that led to this path as opposed to many other paths that you could have traversed?
It's amazing looking back on life and just seeing how every little thing influences the direction. And I think one of the big things for me to start was that I was a Persian kid, first generation immigrant in a very conservative, both religiously conservative and politically conservative town in Orange County. And my parents, not Christian in any way, ended up sending me to a Christian school. And so I was faced with some very existential questions at a very young age with, people in the school and in church talking about how, people who don't believe in Jesus would go to hell, right? And meanwhile, that's my family. So that's a level of right complexity for a young child that is hard to really grapple with, right? And I think that cognitive dissonance kind of grew within me over time. I also have mental health challenges in my family. I wasn't obviously aware of what that was at that age. But all that to say that when I got to around 13, 14 years old, and my parents had just divorced at that point, I experienced depression for the first time in my life. I didn't know what that was. I didn't have the word depression for it, but looking back, I was very clearly depressed. And, the first time in my life that I had the thought of suicide was at that age. And so, it was a very challenging time. I didn't have any way, there was no language back then around mental health, understanding your emotions in school, all this kind of stuff that is more commonplace now, which didn't exist back then, especially not in the town that I grew up in. And so, yeah, I mean, I was just sort of like a nerdy gamer that also loved sports. And my saving grace was that I was on the internet all the time. And, so, it's amazing because I remember like the same tool that allowed me to look up how to commit suicide. And I did look that up back then. Was the tool that I found the books that led me to actually have a shift. So I was on a forum at that same time, just randomly. I don't even know how I got there,
What
but I was
forum?
just looking for stuff.
Do you remember?
I don't remember. Back in the day, it was just like there's forums all over the place, right?
Yeah.
It was like the era of the forum. And so I was just on some forum and I saw some people talking about the Buddhism and these spiritual books that really spoke to them. And people were referencing like the Tao Te Ching and some other different books, some Osho stuff. And there was a couple, one Jiddu Krishnamurti, which is he has a center now in Ojai. And I just went to the local bookstore and tried to find some of these books, and I was able to find a few of them. And I started reading them. And it was through Krishnamurti's book, actually, that I first was introduced to the concept of meditation and the practice of it. Like sat in my room, cross-legged, single point of attention.
And this is at 13.
I was about either 14 or 15 at this
15,
point.
Yeah.
Yeah, 14 was really when it set in. And yeah, I just like was reading these books and started meditating, and through that process, just had a shift in perspective. And I remember distinctly like having an epiphany at that moment, and energetically things shifting within me, like shifting from a state of depression to like, oh, I see the world in a completely new way. Like it was like the pores of reality had opened up a little bit for me. And it just shifted my perspective on life, myself. And I realized that, hey, there might be more to this experience than I'm aware of. And, I think I had the thought that like, if I was born in any other place, right, I probably wouldn't be Christian. And I was Christian. I was baptized Christian. I was confirmed, went through confirmation. I deeply believed in it and was praying on a nightly basis throughout my life. And just realized, hey, there's more out there that I need to explore and discover. And then ended up leaving that school. And and this sort of Eastern, spirituality and philosophy has been a big part of my life since then. And very grateful for it.
So two questions here I want to tease out. One is, I thought you went to a school that was a Christian school, but you were not Christian.
I became Christian as a result of going to that school. My parents were not Christian.
I see.
Yeah.
So you got baptized, you did all this stuff, and they were not, and so the school was saying they're going to hell, and so you're dealing with that cognitive dissonance. And then can you unpack, like, what was the epiphany? Like, how did this epiphany happen? Can you take us through that?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's kind of a big thing to say, but this is what the show's about. So, growing up, going to a Christian school, there's this, the concept of God, right? Monotheistic God. God is something that is up in the sky, right? It's this entity that sees everything, is all powerful, all this sort of stuff. And, I was struggling with, what is God, right? And why would God, the God that they're talking about, do what they're saying that he would do, send everybody to hell, all this kind of stuff. And what happened through the process of meditation and reading these books was just a shift in my understanding of God, in which God went from something that was up there to something that was in here and everywhere. And
here is in
you. I don't mean,
yeah.
And I don't mean to say this in like I could sound like an egotistical maniac saying this, but the realization was I am God and so is everything else. That was the realization. And
what did that feel like? Was that a cognitive thought, or was that an experience that you had? How did you make that determination?
It was like a feeling, right? It was like a thought and a feeling at the same time. And I just remember my like the energy in my body shifting greatly, right? And just like my body felt like it was buzzing a little bit, and I felt like the pores of reality had opened up for me. And I went from a place where I was experiencing depression to feeling like a profound openness in my heart, in my mind, in like and a greater lightness in my being. I just shifted the way that I was approaching life, basically, from that time forward. There was further challenges, which gets into the story of how Rosebud came to be, but that was a huge turning point that really helped me for several years.
What was the impact on the depression that you had mentioned?
I would say it was a combination of like realizing that, hey, the path that I was going on wasn't in alignment with I don't know whatever it is, like what I needed, right? And so I started to feel more and trust what I was feeling, because growing up in such profound cognitive dissonance, there's this thing of like, hey, there's what I'm feeling in my heart, which is that my family shouldn't go to hell, and all my relatives that I've never met shouldn't go to hell, and the friends that I have who aren't Christian shouldn't, right? And what I'm being told, right? And so there's this top-down, like, sort of cognitive kind of cage that's being placed on the feeling, and I'm contending with both of those things. And so there's this lack of trust of my own experience that I was experiencing up until that point, right, in a deep way. And I think what happened was I took that cage off, and the balloons are coming.
There goes the cage.
Perfect timing.
For our listeners, he had balloons, thanks to Apple, go bubbling up around him.
Yeah, just great timing.
Yeah.
And I was able to trust more of my experience, right? So it was like leading a more, I don't know, heart-centered or whatever it is, existence, and following that, right? And that led me to choose to leave that school and choose to do other things, and right, And so then my actions became aligned with like what was actually fueling me, rather than having this like these thoughts of like, this is what, you know, you should believe, or,
Yeah.
you know, whatever it is.
Sean, this is such an interesting topic. First of all, I relate to your story so much. What an incredible story. I also grew up in a conservative culture in Sri Lanka. One specific moment that I remember is I was also trying to make sense of all the religious stuff around me, right? And there was one moment where we're at the temple, and I was supposed to drink the holy water, and there was a dead fly in the holy water, and I was like, I don't want to drink it because there's a dead fly in it. Then my dad slapped me right there. Because like, holy water, you shouldn't insult it. But that was like so confusing as a little child. And that was just like one of so many moments and stories. And again, also relate to, you know, I was depression, and I went through a similar journey around college and looking up on the internet how to kill yourself, and then like the same places where I found a lot of enlightenment too. So it's kind of remarkable how technology can be maybe sometimes a bad thing, but in so many ways bring enlightenment to so many of us. Your story around how you came to see God as somewhat ever present and within you is really interesting and powerful. And one of the reasons I think people seek God, an external God, a monotheistic God, is because there's this internal anxiety around existence being hard in general, right? There's life and all that stuff going on, and all the problems that comes along with it. And even when you don't have any problems and you just sit there in the quiet, it's like, who am I? Well, what am I doing here? Like that kind of question, right? And historically, people leaned on the external kind of narrative of a God. And I'm curious, how you see when you, instead of doing that, when you kind of align yourself to an internal sense of God, or like of all of us being God, or like a ever-present God kind of feeling about nature, does that bring you the same level of certainty or calm, in a sense, that people historically would get from kind of these, you know, traditional religions, and would you say that is a path that's worth pursuing for someone who is confused about all these kind of religious narratives out there?
You know, first I would say there's the way that I think about spirituality versus religion, right? And I think spirituality is a very individual thing, right? Even if you're in a religious context, which I think a religion is sort of like an organized group with order and community, right? That satisfies a few different needs, that kind of uses spirituality and channels that into a sort of human orifice structure. And even within a religion, right, you can be a part of a religion and have your own spiritual identity, right? There's nothing that says that, hey, I'm part of this religious group and I have to necessarily believe exactly what every single person in this place, you know, in the same religious group believes. Probably if you're sitting in a church or a mosque or a synagogue, there's going to be people who, you know, believe very different things than you that are sitting right next to you, right? So everybody's experience with spirituality is unique. And I think that's, you know, something that nothing can take away from you, is your relationship with your experience of being, right? And that's a very deeply personal thing. You know, it filled me with a lot of curiosity, and I think that's kind of my anchor. Is, you know, I was reading Einstein's biography by Walter Isaacson, and in one part of it he talks about how Einstein talked about the music of the spheres. And, you know, I kind of interpret that in a way of like the sort of laws or things of this world, that, you know, we're investigating and learning about in different ways, right? The things that interconnect everything, and, you know, there are some unspoken principles, like energetic principles, right? Things that we're learning about through time that, I think that speak to, sort of my view of God in a way. And so my practice is being very curious and trying to have a relationship with existence and God through that curiosity. So that, yeah.
So let me, if I may jump in, I think there's a theme that's quite interesting, which is the difference between faith and trust. Because one of the things that I noticed, Dylan, knowing your background, right? I mean, you went to a temple, but you grew up Buddhist, right? So the same practices or similar practices that, in some sense, liberated Sean, right? In the context of the religion around Buddhism, you experienced it as a cage, and so to me, how Sean separates religion and spirituality is wonderful, and I often think of it as religion has this idea of faith, right? That you have to just take the gospel at face value, versus trust. And at least the way that it's been taught to me is that trust forms through direct experience, right? Sean, you had this direct experience through a set of practices that shifted your view on what spirituality was and how you experience life itself. And I've had the same thing, right? The Buddhist practices I follow essentially follow this format of really a scientific process that makes a prediction. It says, this is the experience that you're going to have if you do these steps, and then see if you have it. And I do that, and then I have that experience, and I go, holy shit, right? And then I do the next practice, and it's following that curiosity that you're talking about, experimenting, seeing the result, and then that develops this profound trust through direct experience.
There's something about Buddhism. It's actually a pretty shitty religion, and this is why people.
But great practices.
It really sucks balls as a religion, because when your children are dying or from diseases or whatever, what do you do? Like, oh yeah, go meditate, right? Like, that's like really not that great prescription for a lot of people, especially in a pre-industrial society where you're really struggling, right? And you barely have, you're not living in your tower of intellectual whatever, right? So this is something that I find kind of hilarious about Buddhism.
This makes me, I so want to dig into this with you, Dylan. Please
continue. And this is why in practically every single country where Buddhism is practiced, they ended up borrowing elements of other religions that coexisted at the same time. So in Sri Lanka and a lot of South Asian countries, that was Hinduism, right? So when you go to a Buddhist temple, there was a Hindu temple inside the Buddhist temple, and you would go give your whatever flowers to the Buddha or whatever, but you can't pray to the Buddha because Buddha's dead, right? He's not going to come kind of make your wishes come true, right? So then you go right after, you'd go to the Hindu temple, and then you'd give God money, right, which funded the temple, funded the whole operation, and ask for things, right? Like cure my child's diseases, or like cure my dad had a leg that he broke his leg in a car accident and got hit by a bus, and then he would give God like a little golden leg, hoping that God would fix his leg, right?
How did that work?
No, well, but yeah, so this is like an interesting quirk about Buddhism, that in every single country that was adopted, they came up with concepts. Maybe you've heard of like the concept of bodhisattva, is something that people came up with, so that, hey, like if maybe Buddha is dead, right? But what about the next Buddha? Maybe he's like somewhere out there in the sky, and we can ask the bodhisattva for things, right? So it's just, and again, it's kind of making fun of it, but it's a deeply inherent need about being human when you're confronted day over day with insurmountable kind of problems, especially back in the day. And you just need relief. You just need to want to ask for things and your problems to be solved. And I'll finish with like one little thing, and I'm just curious, Sean, if you relate to this in a different way. And so, and when you kind of peel off all this stuff, and when you kind of come to get closer to some kind of pure belief around kind of, God within ourselves, or like whatever, something like that, how do you, when you feel really down, right? Things still can go very wrong. What do you rely on? A practice that I came to adopt is actually a practice from ancient Buddhism called Satyagraha, which literally in Sanskrit means the act of truth. And very briefly, Satyagraha is, the way you practice it is that when you feel really down and we feel really uncertain about what's about to happen and shit might go wrong, you sink into the deepest truths that you know, and you anchor your kind of self and being in that truth. So something I actually literally do is, when I'm feeling stressed out, sometimes I'm like, hey, like deep down, I know fundamentally I'm a good person, and by the power of that truth, everything's going to be okay. And kind of that calms my inner being and my subconscious in a way so that I can go on and operate in the world. That's something that I learned to use and rely on later in life, when I realized that I didn't really want to rely on all these narratives around religion. Curious if you have anything like that, or Ben, you as well. Yeah.
I definitely do. Why don't you go first, Sean?
I mean, I think this is where it's also, it kind of gets into Rosebud a little bit, but this is where there's, great stuff in psychology as well, right? And both psychology and spirituality, there's some overlap and there's some distinction, but they're both trying to describe the nature of our experience, and in psychology, like human behavior. And yeah, I mean, I can get into it in a little bit, because I think this is going to probably go into more of Rosebud. So Ben, why don't you go first?
Yeah. Well, I mean, to me, again, I want to separate out sort of the religion, and Dylan, you have all of these years of direct experience growing up in a culture that was a Buddhist religion. And then I have, my decade plus experience of, Western versions of Buddhism. And I sort of separate out the religious side from the actual practice. And in the actual practices, at least in the Mahamudra and Dzogchen paths that I follow, there's this idea that the Buddha is fully free and fully feeling, right? And so often what's emphasized is just this wisdom aspect, which is the experience that you had, Sean, of like everything is one, right? It's all one, and the true nature of things is that it, it's timeless, it's boundless, it lasts forever, things arise and they're ephemeral. And so people can rest into that. But doing that and just meditating everything is okay doesn't allow for what Dylan was talking about, of like, what do you do about your kid? And going back to the fully free, like that's the wisdom side, but fully feeling, you're also supposed to deepen fully into the compassion side of the relative experience of reality, where suffering does exist, where your dad does break his leg and it does hurt and he can't do things, or your child is sick and dying. And so it really focuses on how do you act from that place. So you're liberating yourself from the suffering, but you still feel the deep sadness of or grief of your child hurting. You no longer need relief from that, because there's no problem there. And so to me, like, that is the practice that I'm in skillfully, of when pain or medical issues arise, or grief or sadness or loss occur, is can I feel it fully without having any resistance? And to me, that work, that's challenging work. And my sense is most people don't actually want to do that. And so then they want a religion where they can go and just pay the money and then feel like they took action instead of like really, really doing the work. So that's my view.
Yeah, really well said. It reminds me of kind of my core probably value, or the thing that I feel like is my goal in my own life is integration. And right, like you have these, and Dylan, you might relate to this, like when you grow up in in the scenario that I grew up in, being from one very different culture, growing up in a very different culture, right? You see the spectrum, right? And I'm kind of like right in the middle of the spectrum. Like, how do I make sense of these two sides that are going on here? I'm sort of like a bridge between those. How do I integrate that, right? And I hear the same thing in what you just shared, Ben, right? Which is, right, in the spiritual, just everything is one, nothing, you can almost get to like a nihilistic place.
Totally. And that's one of the bad off ramps is nihilism, right, or spiritual bypass.
Exactly. Yeah. So, and I definitely did that. I've had my fair share of spiritual bypass, especially, after that first experience. It took me a while to get to figure out integration. And that's actually what, came later, that has really helped me since then. And it was around the time that the inspiration for something like Rosebud came to be. But essentially, it's like, how do you take both that and the, that we are human, right? We're both spiritual. We're human beings having a spiritual experience, or I forgot what the quote was, but
spiritual beings having a human experience.
There you go. It was that way. Right. But it's both, right? And so how do you hold both? How do you integrate both? And that's the practice. And I think that's the practice in like most things in life, right? It's not Democrat or Republican or this or that, right? It's both. And how do you hold both of those things?
Absolutely. All this stuff reminds me, I have this like kind of whimsically in my head, this hierarchy of religions, almost like a class hierarchy. There's like,
I saw you grinning over there. I was wondering what comes next.
So there's like the poor man's religion at the bottom, right? Poor man's religions are things like Hinduism and early pagan religions, all the polytheistic religions. And the reason is like the God's right there. It's in your fucking tree, right? Like it's like, yeah, the big tree in front of your house. That's where God is. Pray to God and God will give you things. And then there's like the middle class religions, which is like the monotheistic religions, which is like, Christianity, Islam and stuff like that. God's not right in the tree. It's like, it's kind of somewhere out there, and you have to buy into the membership in the club, and like you pay your dues and you hopefully get access to God, right? And then there's at the very, very top, the rich man's religion, the luxury religion, which is Buddhism. Which is kind of somewhere between God doesn't exist at all and it's all among us. But then like to really get in touch with it, you need to be somewhat post-enlightenment, have resources so that you have, time to go sit your ass on a mat and meditate every day and like, do all this luxurious stuff, the way we get to. So and as the civilization gets richer and richer, I think we'll all end up in a more Buddhist state than a more pagan state is what I think will happen. On that note, should we jump into some of the stories?
I don't even know how to react to that.
Definitely the first time I've heard that. Yeah. So that's new.
Yeah, it's probably one of my originals, but yeah. So yeah, what do you think, Ben? Should we go to one of the stories?
Yeah. Well, so for those who don't want to meditate, let's talk about alternatives. Starting with some news here around the Therabot, right? This is an AI shrink, if you will. right? This new AI chatbot named Therabody could treat people with mental illness pretty effectively, right? And so this was developed by Dartmouth researchers, and they focused on treating depression, anxiety, eating disorders, and they took this into clinical trials, and they saw that it was comparably effective to human-led cognitive therapy. And so let's talk about that.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Another tidbit that I saw in there was that in the early versions of Therabody, the bot did very, very poorly. And this has been like a 6-year effort for them to get to the point where it can beat human clinicians. But the early versions of the bot got really depressed and sad and went into suicidal ideation, and then started blaming the patients. So I thought that was quite amusing as well.
Blaming the patients and blaming the parents, I think was the big one. It's all your parents' fault, which
that's fair.
Yeah.
It's honestly, that's like a good first approximation as a therapist.
I mean, but this is so close to, Sean, the work you're doing with Rosebud, right? It's a very, very similar use case, and even when you read about the particular details around why patients like the Therabot so much, it's because it's ever present. Patients were talking about how I can talk to this thing at midnight or 3 a.m. in the morning when you're like really kind of feeling those feelings. Your therapist is not there. But an AI-based therapist can be there. So really, curious. Maybe we should talk a little bit about Rosebud and your journey building that and where you see this technology going.
Yeah. That exact thing right there is one of the main inspirations for Rosebud. So I said I had depression for the first time when I was around 14, 15. The last time that I had it was when I was 27. And that was probably, one of the most difficult experiences that I've had. Just going through a lot of transitions all at once. I had just moved to San Francisco. A business that I had spent 4 years working on had failed. Meteoric rise and fall, which is harder, and a relationship ended, all around within a year, basically, and I was in a place of very profound pain.
And can you you can share a little bit of, just because I think people often use the word depression, and then what are the symptoms? How did you even know that you were depressed? Because I noticed for myself that I didn't recognize that I was depressed the first time I had depression till like years later, when someone finally just said, well, these are the symptoms. It was like, oh, so what was going on for you?
Yeah. I mean, in that moment, there was a very severe acute form of depression, which is, just like not wanting to, not even being able to like get out of bed, like feeling like I don't even know what I'm doing here. Again, like some suicidal ideation, and just a profound feeling of like dejection, despondency. So I think that was a pretty acute form. There's obviously less acute forms, which can kind of carry on, right? I forget who there's a term for this that I forget, but where you're just kind of like carrying on in a state of low grade depression for a while. But at that time for me, it was a very acute state.
It sounds like it was situational depression, right? There's a clear set of effects that created that for you.
Actually, Sean, have you had this experience? It's actually really fucking annoying to explain depression to people who are not depressed. And it's really fucking annoying to explain depression to even yourself when you're not depressed. Because like when you're depressed, it's just like like you're saying, it's you can't get out of bed. It's just like this thing where nothing is interesting. You don't really want to do anything. Whereas when you're not depressed, you're thinking like, why the fuck was I not like just doing the thing at the time? It's such a strange mental state.
It is, yeah. It's profoundly isolating state,
Yeah.
right? So yeah, it's a very difficult state to be in, and I have, like anybody who's going through that, I guess I can go into like what helped me, but yeah, I mean it's counterintuitive. I think that the isolation is what
Right.
feeds it, and so yeah, I mean at that time I realized like, hey, I need to see a therapist, and that was the first time that I in earnest kind of started doing therapy. I dabbled with it. I mean, I did a few sessions in the past, but at that point I was like, I realized that I need it. And I was very, very, very fortunate. I was very, very lucky that I happened to stumble across people who, and that I was able to share the state of being that I was in. And I think that's one thing where it's like, there's a form of depression where it's like so bad that you're like, it doesn't matter. At this point, like all is lost. Like I might as well just share what's happening. Whereas like when it's before that point, you're like, I don't want to talk about this. I'm ashamed to even admit it. Right. But yeah, you go so far down that it's like, whatever, I'm just going to talk about this. And I was fortunate to meet people who, one invited me to men's groups. And I got invited to 2 men's groups within the period of like a month. At that point, I started doing therapy. I got, again, recommended a lot of amazing books. And also was journaling profoundly, but journaling can be very helpful, but it can also, not sometimes, where if you have a tendency toward rumination, right? Then, it can help to write it out. But it could be more effective. And that was it was through that process of going to therapy. And, I remember I just realized I had so much that I needed to do. In the first session with my therapist, I asked her, said, could we just do like a 5-hour session? Because I just feel like I have so much stuff to cover. Like 1 hour a week, this is not enough. Yeah. And she declined, and I understand it now.
She was not AI.
Now you can with an AI Therabot.
Yeah, and there are pros and cons to that. But yeah, I mean, there's just a lot, right? And it's when you have sort of patterns, right? Everybody has patterns that we've developed through time, and shifting patterns is difficult. It's like going to the gym and trying to build muscle, right? It takes a lot of repetition, right? It's like noticing the thought, right? That's the first step. Then, okay, what do you do with this thought? It's like the awareness, possibility, action framework, right? You have to do that over and over and over and over and over again, right? And in the very beginning, where I was coming from a place of, I had a bunch of unhelpful thoughts and patterns that, were leading me not to be a great friend to myself. And I just realized that, even with the therapy that I was doing, even with the men's groups, there were still moments at, like they're talking in this Therabody study, at 3 a.m. or 10 p.m., really anytime. You can't, in a traditional model of therapy, you can't just reach out to your therapist in between sessions and be like, hey, I'm overthinking, or in a spiral, in like a downward spiral. Can you help me? There's boundaries there, right? So, who do you reach out to in those moments? You could reach out to friends. Sometimes can be helpful, sometimes not. They may project your own, their own stuff onto you.
Right.
I remember I used, what was it? 7 cups. Are you guys familiar with that?
No.
It's like this site that just connects you with a random stranger on the internet.
Oh,
to talk about stuff.
Yeah.
Cool site, but can be profoundly unhelpful. Like I remember going on that site and connecting with someone and talking to them about stuff, and now I can look back at it and be like, oh yeah, they were just projecting all of their own, wounds onto my situation, and they're like telling me what to do and all that kind of stuff. Not always helpful, right? And so just realizing that, hey, there's an opportunity for a different model here. There's an opportunity for more need, or more support. And that was the first time that, being in San Francisco, people were talking about AI, and, I was kind of thinking about the future. And I was like, oh, I wonder if there could be an AI solution that could help with this. And then there's sort of the journey of through that recovery process, and then really starting to think about this more and more, that led me to, develop the idea in different ways. At that time, I remember looking into the AI tech, and it was pretty basic. Like you could do some basic sentiment analysis on things, but obviously not generative in any way. And you can see that, like, if with Therabody, it took them 6 years. And they call out in the paper how instrumental Gen AI was to the effects that they saw. So, the world really changed with Gen AI, and
absolutely,
and it's amazing.
So a couple of things on this. One is, I think you having a great experience with your first therapist is fantastic.
I didn't, by the way.
No, you did not. Oh, you did not.
No.
Okay.
I went through many.
Yeah.
Many. I can tell you that story too.
Yeah. Well, to me, this is one of the things that I think is so important here, right? Is my experience and my belief is 80% of therapists are not useful, and probably the bottom 50% are damaging, right? So if you're in this sort of self-reinforcing downward spiral, right, and you go to sort of average therapist, a lot of therapists don't understand that having you recount what's going on, you can actually reinforce that pathway, right? So if you're not creating enough psychological safety and allowing the person to actually do that repatterning, you just spiral them down into depression. Or if you're working with intense PTSD, you can just re-trigger that PTSD over and over. And
even if not, there's you could get stuck in this sort of like healing from healing loop forever, and just like the solution is to be on therapy for the rest of your life.
I mean, I've dated enough therapists to know that generally you should not date a therapist.
That's interesting. I want to hear more about that.
Yeah, me too, actually. What are you talking about, Ben?
Well, they're all,
elaborate on that, please.
Usually people are trying to, like, I say, don't date therapists and coaches, right? Because they're trying to fix their own stuff, right? I had a friend that was going through Pacifica University here. This. Oh my God. Anyway, I asked her, I said, well, okay, you're in the PhD program. How many people in your class have a personality disorder? And she's like, all of them. And then I was having dinner with them, and they're all accruing their hours and doing work. And they were complaining about like how their therapy sessions weren't that effective. And it's like, well, we're trying to talk about their feelings, and they're just not engaged and all this stuff. And they're like, well, what do you do? They asked me, because I coach, and I go, well, I ask people what they'd like. And they were like, what are you talking about? I'm like, yeah, I start with like, what would you like in life? And then we work from there. And so a couple weeks later, we're having dinner again, and they're like, we tried that, and we've been having the best therapy sessions ever. And I'm like, you're a fucking postdoc. Like, what the hell did you learn in 5 years? Like, what are you doing?
Ben, have you heard of the term coaching without consent? Because I have multiple friends who are coaches, and we probably don't do it when you're around, Ben. But people bitch about being coached without consent.
But well, yeah, I mean that you can ask for that, but I'm talking about coaching relationships. Are you saying
I'm joking.
Are you saying that I coach your friends without their consent?
Well, no, I mean, so this is actually a thing when you have friends who are coaches, and you just like vent to them sometimes, just like want someone to just listen, but then they're like, where in your body does that feeling come from?
yeah
That type of thing. It's great. I'm mostly making fun, but
I think there's a whole thing around that, right? Because and this points to Sean's thing. People can project onto you, but also just venting sessions aren't always effective, because if you're like, oh yeah, like, no, she's totally a bitch, right? Like, oh, I get, it's like it's fueling the narrative that is generating the upset. And so I don't know, some part of it's like, well, if you're gonna talk to Ben, like, Ben's fucking coachy, like, I'm just coachy. You know what you're
Ben's
in for.
clearly a bit touchy about the subject.
What's that?
I said you're clearly a bit touchy about the subject, but I'm mostly poking fun at you.
Yeah, no, it's good. No, but I think this is important, and to me, bringing it back to the AI therapist is like, we're at a point where immediately, not only can you have something that is available 24/7, which that access is extremely powerful, but I think it's like, I'm using Rosebud every day, and just started using it because we're friends, and then I was like, holy shit, this is super effective. I think it's better than 80% of therapists that are out there immediately.
And even can I add something there? Because even if it's right, even with effective therapists, right, which we can talk about the number, but there's the therapeutic alliance, right? Not every therapist, even if they're a great therapist, like my therapist is a great therapist for me, may not be for either of you, right? And people in general, right? Like, I might be a great friend to somebody, but I may not be a great friend to somebody else, right? Like, there's the human connect, or like a connection element, right? That is important, and that aligns. And they talk about this in the paper as well. But that's, there's the approach that they take, the just personality that they have, right? There's another big thing in therapy is what is the patient projecting or transferring onto the therapist, which is an interesting thing, which, how does that play out in this AI world, right? There is some sort of project and transference happening there, but it's a little bit different. But yeah, I think it's hard to find the right therapist, and it's also like a time consuming process, right? You got to find recommendations, you got to call a bunch of people, right? Like when I first did that back in 2017, I just went with the first therapist somebody recommended, went with them for a couple months or a month or something like that, realized it wasn't right, and then switched, right? And then eventually I was like, you know what, screw this. I got like 5 to 10 recommendations of therapists. I prepared a few questions that I had for all of them, asked them all the same questions, basically interviewed all of them, and then went with the one that I felt like was the best, the most aligned with what I
that's
needed.
High motivation for someone who's depressed.
Yeah.
You're clearly not sufficiently depressed.
I wasn't depressed enough.
Yeah. But I think this is the interesting thing, where there's a way that the process of selecting a therapist is missing, in a sense, product market fit, right? You have a user that is missing motivation to do the work, to go out and find a therapist. And that, to me, whether it's Therabody or Rosebud or another app, is what's so profound, is it's collapsing all of that effort that you described, that whole process that is, I would recommend the same process, right, to find a good therapist. And it's collapsing that into downloading an app and signing in.
Yeah.
Right?
Sean,
go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think Ben's referring to essentially like another advantage of these things is like reducing the friction, right, to get into it. And then we talked about it being available at 3 a.m. and the therapist fit. What non-obvious other things that you have noticed in how people interact with an AI? One potential one, like I actually read an article that you wrote, Sean, about how men are more isolated and kind of struggling to find connection. And it sounded like you were alluding that it's just men just in general find it hard to be vulnerable, and so on. And so perhaps I'm curious, have you seen when people interact with Rosebud, they're just like finding it easier to be vulnerable or not? I don't know. Especially this kind of, and are there any other interesting usage patterns that you've seen that are not obvious?
Yeah. So, I mean, all the information that we get is basically through people giving us feedback. There's no, we don't see any of the data or anything like that. But I can, share that, for instance, I was chatting with, on this piece of being more willing to speak with with AI than human. That is a consideration, right? Like, I was chatting with one of my mom's friends, right, in her 60s, and she was saying, she wouldn't want to go talk to a therapist because she doesn't feel comfortable like sharing that with another person, right? Which is interesting. This is somebody in their 60s, and there's a lot of people that have that feeling. At the end of the day, right, there's this fear that, hey, this is another human, they could judge me, right, for what I'm sharing or whatever it is, right? And I would say if between the option of not sharing something with anybody and sharing something with an AI, I think sharing something with an AI is probably better, given certain edge case, like as long as you're covering certain guardrails, certain edge cases. In general, expression is a valuable thing. Verbal expression is a valuable thing, and bringing awareness to, just externalizing something can be very valuable. Would be my take.
You mentioned something actually earlier around kind of the improvements that these models have made. This is actually a great segue to our next topic. So let's touch upon that first really quickly, which is that OpenAI released a new benchmark called HelpBench. And this is an open source benchmark for measuring LLM performance when it comes to health related questions. And specifically, this is not just sort of like tests like USMLE, which is like this test that every doctor or medical student in the US has to take, which is much more fact focused, right? Whereas this benchmark is a much broader range of questions, real world medical puzzles that come up. It's sort of, think of it like kind of Dr. House kind of situations, right? Where the LLM is able to diagnose, medical conditions and suggest treatment plans and stuff like that. And the data is really interesting. One thing that I found really interesting is that doctors who use LLMs performed significantly better at HelpBench than a doctor who doesn't use an LLM and just like kind of relying on their own intellect and memory and stuff like that, right? And then LLMs themselves have dramatically improved. So, for example, GPT 3.5 used to score around 16% in early tests, and 4.0 was 32%. And then O3 that came out just maybe a month or so ago is at 60%, which is remarkable. And so, two things here: AI is getting really good, really fast at these health specific use cases, and also we're developing ways of measuring that improvement, which is really important. And Sean, the question to you is, you're from a very product point of view, you're an engineer, you're building this product and you want it to improve over time. How do you measure the effectiveness of Rosebud? Like, what metrics or KPIs or whatever do you use to do that?
Yeah, I think it's a really important question. And there's a lot about this actually that we could talk about that's in the news related to a couple other things that have happened. But I saw Mark Zuckerberg chat with Dwarkesh Patel.
Oh, I saw
think
that too. Yeah, it was good.
Yeah, a little over a week ago, right? And he's talking about, right, engagement as sort of one of the primary internal metrics that they're using in terms of tuning their LLMs, right? And right, so if that's the goal, what does that mean in terms of how, right? What's the game theory on that?
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's the goal, but
yeah.
Super dangerous.
And
maybe
yeah, and you have
unpack. Can you unpack your concerns about that a little bit? Just other people may not understand exactly why engagement is a risky metric, even though it's obvious. It seems like an obvious risk for us.
Right, and it's the traditional, right, in tech, you're always looking at, right, it's the social media model, increase engagement, right? Every app wants to increase engagement. So it's a natural way of thinking. But I think you can look no further than just like a week prior to that, or that maybe it was the same week, where OpenAI was getting slammed for releasing an overly sycophantic model, right? And they actually reverted the change to the model. Now, if you look at what they were actually doing in that change, was they used feedback from users using the the little thumbs up, thumbs down on each message. They like weighted that feedback, the thumbs up feedback from users, higher in the model that was released, that was being, people were complaining about being overly sycophantic. And so there's this really interesting kind of thing happening here where it's like a model needs to be sycophantic enough that it maximizes retention, but not so sycophantic that it acutely leads to harm or self-harm or something like that, right? Or delusion, right? So there's this like needle that these companies are trying to thread, right? Where the game theory promotes there's a need for some sycophantism, because we see from like LM Arena, where there's these studies that show that, or the feedback that they've seen is that users prefer sycophantic models. And so what is a sycophantic model? We can get into that. Or what is sycophantism?
Yeah, well, what is that? Why don't we define that?
Yeah, so sycophantism is essentially, it's being, let's say, overly agreeable, where whatever you say, the LLM kind of agrees. And, it's like if you have something that's not just validating what you're saying, but taking on the same worldview that you take on, no matter what it is. So, people have probably had an experience with AI, and I've done this myself, where if you word something slightly differently, and then you edit the message and then word it a slightly the other way, you can actually get the AI to take both positions, right? And so the implications of this are interesting, especially as you think about people are using AI to make decisions in their, across a bunch of different things, right? Founders, CEOs are using AI to make decisions at a company level, right? People, employees are using AI to make decisions for their companies. People are using AI to make decisions for their lives. And so where sycophantism, where it got too sycophantic, was it was leading people to, like, people who had maybe more extreme views, or there was some forms of delusion. It was validating those ideas in a way that led to harmful behavior. And so that's right. There's this spectrum of sycophancy, and it's like, how sycophantic can it be to where it's because there's this competition happening between all these AI providers, where you need to maximize retention, and that people like that. So you have to make it sycophantic enough to maximize engagement and retention, but not so sycophantic that it leads to delusion, this kind of harmful behavior.
I've seen exactly this, where multiple people from coming back to religions, from different religions, use conversations with AI as proof that Jesus is the answer, or no, we're all one thing, or it's Buddhism or Hinduism. I've seen exactly those conversations where it goes through this apparently very logical step-by-step conversation that leads to the outcome that, unsurprisingly, is exactly what the user was hoping would be true. And this challenge that you're describing around engagement, this has been the exact same private narrative around social media, right? They know that they're employing these techniques that, as sort of Tristan Harris said, sort of hack the brainstem. It's giving you this dopamine reward, but then, and to get people to be engaged, but then they're aware that it's not exactly healthy, right? But if you turn that dial down, then you lose that engagement and it goes to some other platform where perhaps the ethics of that team are, you might consider them to be less than your own, so that you can sort of get yourself in this moral feedback loop of, well, I'm trying to do the right thing so I can drive engagement because I'm going to try to do the healthy things for the user. So
what's the measurement that you use, Sean?
Yeah. I'll say, we're still we still have work to do on this front. And I think this is where Rosebud, it's a different tool than these other tools, right? Our goal isn't necessarily just to engage people, right? Our goal is to help people in their health and well-being. And so if somebody is over relying on AI and that is preventing them in like a, health and wellness and meeting their becoming the best version of themselves, if that over reliance is leading to somebody is preventing somebody from achieving those goals, right? Then it's not aligned with what we're trying to promote with our platform. So it is a tricky position to be in, because as Ben said, like the pure game theory approach is maximize engagement, right? Figure out exactly how we can maximize engagement and retention as much as possible. And that is how we're going to be the most competitive against all these other companies. But that's not the fundamental mission of our product. And so with that mission, we look at other things, right? So we do survey users on their mental health and sort of subjective experience, and we want to improve those measurements. But yeah, I think it's really tricky when the thing that you are incentivized to look at it is engagement, right? But for us, that's just not the goal of our product.
It really depends on the business model, right? Like, because if you're really this is kind of the Facebook comes from the ads world and supposed to be a free product, and engagement is what gets you eyeballs. And whereas your product, and actually what I'm building Assistant to as well, people pay us to achieve their fitness and wellness goals. So, and we use a lot of AI in the back end as well, and we directly measure like how much weight have they lost, and how many workouts are they doing, right? And those are the metrics that we try to improve. Whereas in your case, you could measure like what's their happiness level or something like that, and the subscription product in both cases, which is just like it frees you from this sort of like race to the bottom, or sort of like the situation that you're talking about, trying to optimize for engagement.
Yeah. I think that is the approach that we have to take. And right, we're not going to be, obviously, like we're not trying to be a general purpose tool for everything, right? And there's going to be a subset of people who value that. And I think something that we can also that we're also excited to do a better job of is reflecting that back to those improvements back to the user. The AI is kind of doing that right now. But we don't have visibility exactly on what the AI is saying to users, so I couldn't tell you exactly what that is right now.
Well, just one question on this for both of you, right? Because in a way, you're both in the self-improvement space. Is that whether or not you do a metric like number of workouts or weight loss, or on your side, Sean, I don't know if you use any of the standards like the GAD-7 or PHQ-9? Do you do any of those sort of therapy standard tests?
We don't currently do that.
Got it. There's still engagement, right? I mean, Dylan, I'm sure you're looking at your retention numbers and thinking about like, hey, every month that someone's on our subscription is more revenue, and engagement is related to their health and things like that. So isn't there some sort of internal navigation where you must be discussing engagement?
Well, retention and engagement are different, right?
Yeah.
Engagement literally is like a product like character.ai, where kids are spending 2.5 hours a day talking to this virtual girlfriend, right? Or TikTok, right? Like it's like it's like a train wreck that you can't take your eyes off of, and you're spending hours a day swiping. And retention matters for those products as well, and which is that they want you to keep doing that many hours a day, and then they want you to keep that many hours a day for many years. Whereas the former is not true for, I think, Sean's product or my product. The latter is true, which is
but
retention.
They're related.
Yeah,
they're related, right? I mean, engagement with Sean's product on a daily basis leads to
actually not direct related, at least in our case. I doubt in Sean's case as well, because we don't expect anyone to use a fitness app more than they kind of need to or should be. Like we would like them to open it every day so that they kind of log their habits and kind of log their workout. Yeah. But we don't expect it to interact with it for more than, like, I don't know, the literally the minimum required amount.
Yeah, and I would echo that. Yeah, we're not trying to have people log in every single day to use Rosebud. And I've talked with people who are users, and they maybe they just use Rosebud once a week, right? Some people maybe a couple times a month as needed. I think that's the amazing thing about this technology, is that the price point is so low that the value that a product like Rosebud provides, even in like if you just journal with it a few times a month, is probably worth the $12.99 that you're paying for it, right? It's like 2 cups of coffee.
And how much less than your therapist?
Yeah, exactly.
What you just said, Sean, brings me to a technical question I actually wanted to ask you, which is how do you, like, you started working on these products when LLMs were nascent, and like you were saying, it could only do sort of emotional detection type thing, which is kind of quite useless. But now things have gotten to a point where, as you can see from these benchmarks like HelpBench, the LLMs at a point where it can compete with a real doctor, right? And so that is one axis of progress. And that axis will continue, sort of like the accuracy side of things. What other axis of progress would you like to see for LLMs to be really effective at these types of coaching, therapeutics type tasks? One that comes to my mind is memory, which is a problem that you can, I'm sure, talk a lot about. And another one is sort of like, at least from architecturally, how do you make the LLM proactive as opposed to just reactive? So kind of design patterns around that. Can you talk a little bit about like what you would like to see in the evolution of LLMs and agentic software tooling and all that?
Yeah, I mean, well, you just nailed 2 things that are very squarely on our roadmap and priorities. So I mean, our 2 big focuses are on memory and making it more proactive. So well done. And yeah, on the memory side of things, right, it's obviously there's many folks working on this right now, and ChatGPT has
actually, maybe you can define the memory problem for the audience. It's a pretty subtle problem that people don't quite understand until you kind of really start working on these products.
Yeah, so the memory problem is that right, there's a limited what you call a context window that LLMs have, that this new Gen AI has, that you can fill, right? It's like kind of like a working memory, and it's a very, very, I mean, it's a relatively small working memory. when you consider all the things that you might experience or need to talk about in your life.
Right. This might be, you could think of it as equivalent to if your therapist could only remember your last session, right? Would be
that's
the context,
a great way to.
Would be a small context window, one way of describing that.
Yeah, exactly. And if you've used Claude, for instance, right, Claude doesn't have any form of memory, and it is very frustrating. Every single time I use Claude, I have to reestablish context, right? It's like, imagine if you had to, every single therapy session you went to, you had to reestablish all the context of your entire life in that therapy session, and then you could start talking, right? That's extremely inefficient and frustrating and not desirable in terms of user experience. So memory is, right, how can you ferry this information around with you? And I know there's people who are working on an actual independent memory system where right, you can take stuff between Claude, ChatGPT, etc. But there's a challenge there in which memory is different depending on the type of application, right? So the type of memory that we would optimize for within Rosebud is different than the type of memory that maybe ChatGPT or Claude or another product like your product might optimize for. And so there's sort of a unique challenge here within our context where, in the same way that a therapist or a coach, right, remembers you differently than just a friend might remember you, right? There's a certain mental model and framework by which different therapists or coaches are operating, right? And that informs the way that they remember. And so similarly, right, the way that Rosebud remembers, right, in order for it to be effective for the use case that we're building for, the memory must function in a different way than just a general purpose memory solution. And so that's a challenge that we're very excited about, and one that we're working on currently.
No, we have a very similar set of problems. I actually, probably will call you offline to talk more about this, but but the LLMs are getting really good at this. There's a kind of a measurement called the needle in a haystack measurement, where how, depending on where in the context a piece of information is the LLM able to access it, kind of thing. And it used to be, it was pretty terrible if it was sort of in the middle of the context, but it's getting a lot better now with models like Gemini, where the LLM is able to access the information. And as this tooling and the models get better, there's a lot that hopefully we can do for users.
Now, one question I have for you, Sean, is you support multiple LLM models on the back end of Rosebud, and it's great that as a user one can choose. Which one do you use when you're journaling?
Oh, wow, that's a personal question.
Yeah.
For the most part, I use Claude.
Okay.
You're not using DeepSeek?
No, that's one we don't support.
You don't want the CCP to know all of your deepest, darkest secrets?
Yeah, not quite yet.
And is there a reason that you use Claude over Grok or OpenAI's models?
Again, it's just I like the responses better, right? And this is where it's again that
a
therapeutic
lot more flattery, right?
Yeah, there's just the level of he just validates what I say. But there are these nuances, right? And I think getting back to that therapeutic alliance, or just who you get along with, right? These different models have slightly different ways of communicating and things like that. And I don't know that there's ever going to be one that satisfies everybody, right? There's some degree of a personalization layer, right, that I think has yet to be fully figured out, which I imagine will become more sophisticated in the future. But that's That's what I use.
Yeah, I
I
actually
actually
use the same one. I went with Claude, and it just feels a little bit more human, like just a little
Yeah.
bit more compassionate
Yeah.
or empathetic. That's what I've noticed.
Yeah, and speaking of benchmarks, I haven't seen a great benchmark for this, like feeling empathic or emotional
Yeah.
intelligence. I don't even know if it would be like accurate, right? And again, like how effective it would be, but
Yeah.
I haven't seen anything like that personally.
I actually have a prediction, Sean. It's very related to this topic that we're talking about, which is there's sort of like two versions of the world that investors especially think about when they invest in AI LLM companies. One kind of future is that a foundation model or a small number of foundation models basically win out all the use cases, and basically like ChatGPT will dominate every single thing that you want to do. Everything from like being the use case for education, mental health, solving problems and whatnot. I'm actually far less, really skeptical of that future, because exactly like the problem that we're talking about, the when you try to cater to everyone, the model ends up being sycophantic, and then you can't really, like, kind of really hard to solve that problem. Whereas I believe the future is going to look more like the foundation models likely will be far more commoditized, and companies and entities will build products on top of those foundation models that actually has an opinion, that actually has a specific use case or a point of view that people come to trust over time, and that brand trust will carry or capture most of the consumer attention, and therefore most of the value. And hopefully, that future is where, purely from a economic business point of view, I think the future where something like Rosebud could be enormously successful, and something that I'm thinking about a lot as well.
Yeah, I think I hold that view as well. And I think, right, ChatGPT they have to thread that line where they're trying to meet as many use cases as possible while still being a general extensible solution, right? But yeah, I mean, you just think about like the size of the services market in the United States, right? Software services. It's like the amount of work that goes into tailoring something to a specific use case, right? And the workflows for that particular use case, just all the nuances and intricacies for that particular use case. There's a lot that goes into that, and it's hard to think that OpenAI would be able to do that effectively, and they would need to have many different organizations, right, within their organization, and fragments, and it would slow them down significantly. So I don't see them doing that anytime soon, but I think they will try to like thread the needle of like, how do we meet as many use cases as possible while still being this general solution with a simple interface.
So Dylan, as part of your prediction, is it that the value is going to get squeezed out of the LLMs, that companies like Anthropic or OpenAI actually won't be making the lion's share of the money, and it will go to
essentially
the
yes.
services on
Yeah, essentially yes, right? Like they will kind of become sort of like databases or whatever, right? A very, very commoditized form of technology. And this is not to say that these companies will, some of these companies will still be enormously valuable, but the difference is that is OpenAI going to be, some tens of billions of dollars or maybe $100 billion of value, or is it going to capture, literally all of the economic value in the light cone, like Sam Altman once put it, like a multi-trillion-dollar company, right? Like I don't think that's going to be the case. I think a lot of the value will be actually captured by products that build trust around certain services.
All right, so let's jump into the hack of the week. And Sean, you've got your hack, and I know you sort of gave us a little bit of a prelude, but why don't you talk to us about men's groups?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, men's groups, something that I've been doing since 2017, pretty consistently. I took some time off, but for those that are unfamiliar, men's groups are groups where guys get together and talk about their emotions. That's basically it. As men, we need groups for this because we just don't do it naturally. right? Women, they go to the restroom, they, you know, they have their ways of doing it, right?
Yeah.
But men, right, like for the most part, we're naturally, you know, when we're collaborating, there's some sort of goal, right? We tend to be in competitive circles with one another, whether it's in sports or whatever it is. And so creating a space where you can be vulnerable with other men is, it's been tremendously healing for me. And now beyond being healing, it's just freaking helpful. Like I have my men's group here in LA. We meet once a month. You know, some of the closest connections that I've made in my life, I've made through men's group. Actually, my co-founder, Chris, we met in a men's group. So yeah, it's definitely my number one hack. I always am promoting this because I feel like until you experience it, you don't know how powerful it is.
And how frequently do you meet?
We meet once a month currently.
Okay.
I've been in groups, you know, which have been once a week, bi-weekly, once a month. And, you know, I think, you know, there are great organizations out there that are doing this. Everyman is one, you know, there's Mankind Project in the Bay Area. But if you're fortunate enough to know somebody who is in a men's group, definitely reach out to them. And you know, if you're not, there's actually there's a website, I forget what it's called. I think it's Men at Work or something like that, which lists out all the men's groups by city in the world. So you can send that link over, and highly recommend it.
Great. And last part of the tip here is, what would be your number one tip for picking a good men's group?
You know, it's tricky because on some level, the men's group is going to make you uncomfortable, especially if you've never been in one before, right? So you can't go in and be like, this, you know, I'm uncomfortable here, blah, blah, blah. Like, you're going to have, if you've never been vulnerable with other guys, it's obviously going to, you know, be uncomfortable. So you kind of have to lean into that discomfort and just try it for a bit. And, you know, I mean, I guess if you're fortunate enough where there's multiple men's groups around, go try a couple of them and see. But yeah,
I'm asking because I'm in search for one. I did one years ago, and with actually a lot of our friends, and I sat through that whole thing, and I just went, I don't care. No, I mean, I care about them, but I was like, none of this conversation is relevant to where I am in my life. So I realized I was looking for people where I could learn from the challenges they're facing. So that's one of the things that
I relate to that so much. I've tried men's groups a couple of times as well, and it was incredible. It's remarkable how different men behave in men's groups. It's like it's different from like just like a bunch of bros hanging out or whatever. And at the same time, I had some of Ben's experience as well. I really want to find a group where maybe it will be a bunch of founders, right? So that way I can like relate to them more. Whereas the couple instances where I was in a men's group, it was just like the experiences didn't overlap enough. So I think I'd love to find that.
That part is really tricky, I will say. And you know, the men's groups that I like, the current one that I'm in, is just through friends, right? We started it. It's like, hey, you know, we feel like we're in a similar enough place, right? So I think if you're at that stage, right, at the beginning, I was talking to people who may not have ever done a men's group or are not familiar with it, but if you're at the stage where like you have dabbled in this kind of stuff before, it is tricky. I've probably been in like 6 or 7 men's groups in the past 7 years, and sometimes you grow out of a group, right? You guys. It was good for a period of time, but now you're in a different phase of life. Different people are in different phases of life, and you move on, and that's fine, right? So yeah, I would say if you're in that place where you have friends who are interested in this kind of stuff, just like it could even start with like just a couple people. The first group, the one that I was in with Chris, was just me, Chris, and another friend. So, and it doesn't have to look a certain way, right? You don't have to Don't have to like, do, all the things and say aho and all this kind of stuff. Like it could just be like founders. It could just be, like with the one with Chris, we would just go to Tartine Bakery in the Mission. Like that's it. We just literally go there and we'd grab some stuff, we talk, right? And that's a group, right? The important thing is that you just have people that you're talking about your journey with, and that there's like this feeling of mutual support.
I love that. Thank you, Sean. Wow, that you've inspired me to seek out a men's group again, and so I'm gonna look into that. But also, what an amazing discussion! I just loved every minute of it. So it was super fun, and I think we'll wrap up now. And please subscribe to our YouTube channel and Spotify and Apple Podcast and so on, and let us know how we can do better next time. Sean was our first guest, and I think Ben and I had a blast chatting and exchanging ideas, and we plan to do this a lot more in the future. And thank you so much for listening, everyone.
And thank you, Sean, for joining us.
Yeah, thank you guys. It was a good time.